Welcome back to the Gods and Spirits blog, where I am vlogging today on a very warm day in South London. This video is filmed today a couple days after what would be the 83rd birthday of an amazing musician, activist and friend, Julie Felix. Julie, Heron has flown you home since more than a year ago, and I make this video in tribute to you in the hopes that I can make the video in full this time. I have made a previous one on this channel which ended up incomplete, but I make this video in tribute to you and all that you've contributed to feminist and activist movements, and also to one of your most fantastic songs. That song is La Que Sabe, and so that's what we're exploring today. We are having a little exploration of a figure derived originally from the cultures of Western North America, going as far south as the deserts of Mexico. She's a figure who, in the perspective of European pagans and followers of goddess, would be considered a crone or wise old woman archetype. And to the original Spanish colonizers of this region, she became known as La Loba, which means she-wolf, or La Que Sabe, which means she who knows. Now, she could also be thought of as she who remakes the unmade. Everything about that sort of idea comes into a book of myths and stories of the wild woman archetype, which is titled Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which is a very popular book in spiritual feminist movements. I think anyone who has known me from the goddess movement, watching this, certainly any woman from the goddess movement who is watching this will probably already be very familiar with Women Who Run with the Wolves. I have to add a little joke in here that when I first heard the name La Que Sabe at a Glastonbury Goddess conference, I actually misheard it as Lucky Sally, and I was thinking, like, who is Sally? What makes her so lucky? And why is Julie singing about her? But obviously, yeah, that was misheard. The name is La Que Sabe, and that's that is a name for her more often known, I believe, among the Pueblo peoples and possibly some of their neighbouring indigenous communities, and how she was known among tribes that lived around that region, what we now call New Mexico. But I'm linking up La Loba today, the she-wolf, who was, as she was known in other desert regions of North and Central America. I'm linking up La Loba today with a drink produced in Britain, which is one that I've reviewed before in my 12 Wolves of Christmas last December. And the drink is called Bare Bones, and it's by Lone Wolf, which is the brand of gins from Brewdog in Elon, Aberdeenshire. It's Bare Bones. Bare Bones is the essential recipe of Lone Wolf. They say on the bottle that it's the purist's choice, flavoured with the bare essentials: juniper, coriander, angelica root, and grapefruit peel. So there are other ingredients that go into the standard, their original flavour of Lone Wolf gin, but this one is the bare bones, and I suppose it does fit in very well with what I'll have to tell you today about La Loba. So, how do bones come into the whole idea of this archetype of La Loba and La Que Sabe? Well, it's said that this archetype is a woman who gathers up bones and parts of what once was whole, of beings that have perished in the deserts, and she takes them into her cave in the night, and she whispers over the bones. She gives a quiet song, and the bones form together and reawaken as a reborn being. She was said to have lived as an outcast or hermit in the desert in its caves, and said to mostly come out at night. And obviously that implies that she's quite a scary being. It's the whole legend of la bruja mala, the evil witch, and all of that. But obviously that's how myths like that have been colonized and corrupted and made to seem and obviously given such a such a tarnished image that of course they inevitably seem scary to a culture that's been sanitized by Christianity, and I'll come back to that point. She was so of course what I say of what La Que Sabe would do. This was seen as a supernatural explanation for why the bones of dead creatures have moved after carrion birds and other creatures have feasted on their remains. Of course, we know in a material and scientific sense that the bones really disappeared due to natural erosion and other factors. But the people in these tribes at the time believed that the bones had actually been taken by a supernatural being, and they normally, in these regions, attributed it to La Que Sabe or La Loba. And so I would imagine, in theory at least, that this explanation also then was applied to how they would explain unusual creatures that appeared to these tribes when they would be out hunting or doing anything of that kind. If an unusual creature appeared that seemed to be mixed up of two different wild animals, I think particularly of jackalopes, the jackrabbit that grew antlers on its head, they would imagine that that La Que Sabe actually gathered up the bones of two animals and remade it whole as a single animal, but a mix of both. And so then you would have an explanation for creatures like jackalopes. Um, Again, of course, there are real explanations for this, um, although we don't. I believe we don't entirely know um, why um, why for certain um, jackalopes had antlers um, on their heads. The most realistic theory has been that they um, that jackrabbits sometimes had tumours of some kind, which actually then grew out of their skulls and formed as antler-like shapes. But other than that, it's considered that the jackalopes were simply an anomaly and a myth for the most part. But it is said that jackrabbits with antlers have historically been witnessed in many parts of North and Central America. So, as I mentioned, the colonialist perspective of Europeans is a reflection of what defines La Que Sabe today. Um, of course, as we've also known in European history, the wisdom of the old woman was demonized by the patriarchy. And it's said that a lot of that demonization was because of how that wisdom which they held was rooted in the land and in instincts, especially women's instincts. And these were things which a devoutly Catholic culture at the time viewed as unholy, because, of course, a woman who any women who knew these things had power, which men, which elements of the patriarchy coveted, and the church believed that it couldn't possibly belong to women. So they feared these women who had wisdom that was rooted in the land. And when I'm talking about the land, I'm talking about what it can offer to us, its healing gifts, its beauty, its parenthood, its silence, and its song. And when I think of song, I think particularly of spirit song, which is, as I understand it, a reconstructivist tradition, which has emerged among neo-pagans. I wouldn't wish to say that it's emerged from any particular indigenous culture, because I'd probably be mistaken if I were to say a particular culture that it emerged from, and I wouldn't want to make that mistake. But it is essentially the idea of letting our own feelings and our own heart, the needs of our heart, emerge as a song, just a toning, a letting out of the voice, particularly if it can bring tears to the eyes, to our own eyes. It's not guided by anything that we've heard. It's not guided by any song that inspires us. Preferably, it is just the inner inspiration of the emotion, then being expressed in a tune that the voice simply lets out. And that's almost in a sense, one of the purest ways that the song of the soul comes out. And when I say song of the soul, people might imagine that I'm being very, very deeply spiritual about it, but actually, from my own point of view, in a view that I've had for about 5 years now, um, it's actually a very humanist way of viewing the nature of the soul. This idea that our that our souls are voices, and indeed souls that have been long before are voices. Souls of any figures that have been around before us are voices. Some of these songs are divinities or beloveds or um, any anything that would be considered of a divine or profoundly spiritual nature. Um, and so, though, so we can say that when those beings have been around and have had a place in the world, where they have affected the world, they were already voices, and they have left behind a song. Their impression on the universe is a song. The song is a reflection of the soul's experience, and the soul's experience is, I suppose, the impression that the universe has left on that voice, but conversely, the impression that that being has left upon the universe. And I don't mean in terms of history, I mean more broadly in terms of cause and effect. In all senses, in the sense of every little change that a life or a being may have affected in the world. I'm glad I'm explaining this better than than my last attempt at recording. And so lands and spaces can also do this. They can leave an impression upon the world around us, upon their visitors, and so those lands and those spaces, they have songs too. And essentially, the archetype of the wise old woman has learned those songs all through her life. They may be literal songs and chants, but they may also be recipes and lessons of the heart, ways to heal the body and mind. And so when there is a change in those lands, or something different about a spirit with which this wise old woman is connected, the prevailing idea was that this wise old woman was connected, and she can sense it. She feels it in her bones. And at this point, I am going to check whether the video is still running. Very good. It still is. I'm very pleased with that. So, going on to what's felt in the bones, what we mean by feeling it in the bones, and what I mean by that is memory, and particularly memory carried by our ancestors. Um, and it is an interesting thing that modern pagan communities talk about ancestors and connecting with them, but often often the assumption is to do with those ancestors that we know of, um, those ancestors that we can specifically connect with. Um, it's not as easy when you don't feel as perhaps connected with your own bloodline, and so there's been a whole thing of seeing ancestors as kith rather than only kin. Um, those those we consider spiritually, that we consider ourselves spiritually descended from rather than just descended from by bloodline. But of course, when you look back along a bloodline, you end up with more than 16 people, because those 16 people will have 16 ancestors, and so they will also have roughly 16 ancestors, and so that spreads it in kind of an infinite regression, going back so many generations, and so really ancestors are the what should be considered literal or empirical interpretation of what we mean by ancestors is in fact that many people going back, which could be a connection to quite a number of cultures from long before, and bloodlines from long before. And I suppose for the larger part we are all connected in with those bloodlines, with the multiple bloodlines, not just a single one, not just the ones that we know of. So feeling it in the bones and memory carried by ancestors, as I say, that's a very literal and empirical thing, um, that we can see it as. Every human individual's ancestors have carried lived memories to us through epigenetics, through the effects of events down the bloodline, um, that have affected the genes, and so they have had they have therefore had an influence on what genes are in the very thing that makes our blood, the marrow of our bones. So that is literally how it is. Knowledge that is knowledge and instinct that is felt in the bones. These are things like the reason why we yawn when we hear others yawning. Even talking about it now, I feel like giving a yawn. And you're all going to end up yawning. Pretty much all of you will end up yawning because you have heard me yawn. Anthropologists paleoanthropologists particularly, will tell you that this is because of the communal state in which our furthest back ancestors used to live. And so yawning around each other would be an indication that it is time to sleep. And that is why you instinctually get a desire to let out a yawn as well. It's also the reason that we know certain things in nature are dangerous by their colours and patterns. I think I just saw a wasp fly by earlier with its yellow and black, and we instinctively understand yellow and black to be potentially dangerous. and again, that is instinctual. That's the reason also why survivors of traumatic episodes of human history, such as the Holocaust, have gone on to find that their children and grandchildren suffer from the neurological effects of trauma, even when there is no other discernible cause. Epigenetic memory is our natural built-in routing back to our ancestors, to their experiences and their voices. That's why it's in our bones. So, La Que Sabe and La Loba, in a reconstructed context, it could easily be said are our healing powers they represent our healing powers to rebuild what in our bloodlines has made us strong and dispose of what affects us now that can no longer serve us. To call to La Que Sabe and La Loba is to call to songs of ancient knowledge and through those discover or uncover and thus reveal what we can truly be in reflection of those ancient songs which sing of she who works between the worlds of the living and the dead, she who remakes the unmade, she who knows. So I'm going to tell you about I'm going to take my segue here into telling you about bare bones gin. The nose is strong compared with many ordinary or dry gins. It shows that there's clearly more juniper packed into a regular lone wolf gin than many others. The palate still carries a lot of the spice. Palate still carries a lot of the spice of the original lone wolf flavour. It's warm, but it's also crisp, and clear, and that warmth is definitely a big part of the taste profile. The warmth that you get from the coriander and the angelica root. And that spice does create a certain fizz that goes across the tongue, with a real heat and crackle on the back of the tongue before it's finished. I felt I should review it, mixing it with soda water, and yeah, I say that this mix has a clean bit of sparkle that really brings out the unique flavours of most of the botanicals in bare bones. Those flavours, they take a kind of hop and skip across the tongue, but there's not really a jump. Unfortunately, the coriander taste kind of sinks, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but coriander might not be the note that everyone is looking for. There's a bit of epigenetics that goes into that, of course, because some people can be genetically predisposed to finding the taste of coriander absolutely horrible. Thankfully, I'm not one of those people, but I do feel sorry for my friends who are. So, having less in it makes a drink made with lone wolf bare bones anything but humdrum. I'd say that it's actually very brash and gives you a real 1-2 punch in terms of taste. It's definitely worthy of being a drink for hot summer's day. I can certainly guess this gin is not the taste we might think of when we think about bare bones, but the taste is very much like the sort of spell that would put flesh back onto bare and lifeless bones. And really thinking I might get myself another bottle of bare bones sometime, personally. So once again, this has been my little video about La Que Sabe and La Loba. And this has been a tribute to Julie Felix, the late and great Julie Felix, who passed away last year, whose birthday was June 14th. She would have been 83 this year. Is a really amazing musician, great artist and activist, and I'm really glad to have been able to call her my friend. I really regret that I didn't get to go to a workshop she once did at Glastonbury Goddess Conference called You're a Song. It got rescheduled, so unfortunately I wasn't able to attend it, and I wish I could have got an album signed from her. I do have signed copies of her albums, but this was a copy of an album that I had hoped to bring to a friend, and never managed to get that signed. Very unfortunate. But yes, I'm glad I've been able to record this in tribute to Julie. Hail La Loba and La Que Sabe. And Heron fly you home, Julie. With much love. Thanks for watching.